Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us on this very sunny Friday. We know you have a choice, but it's great that you've joined us for this regular Friday lunchtime thinking with Santander. The title, Can't We Just Ditch Social Media and Get Along? I want to start because I need to keep myself under control on this subject just by reading a couple of quotes. Okay, this is from Pop Bitch yesterday. This is a little bit autobiographical. Tom Hardy's dad has a YouTube account with uploaded chats to camera, including seeing through the world leader scam. That's not really relevant, but also your phone is radically changing your consciousness and your stuff ends up owning you. Average view count 1. Okay, so just want everyone to bear that in mind. And then slightly more pertinently, this is from Gareth Southgate's letter to England before the Euros. He said, social media has been a key resource in giving our players a platform and has been a positive tool in so many ways. In fact, I feel like this generation of England players is closer to the supporters than they have been for decades. Despite the polarization we see in society, these lads are on the same wavelength as you on many issues. And then he goes on to say, that said, there are times when my parental instincts kick in. I can't help it. After all, I'm old enough to be a father to most of my players. I see the players scrolling on their phones straight after the final whistle, and I think, is that a particularly good idea? Now, as I mentioned to our great guest speakers today, on this occasion, I'm going to break a rule. Normally at these thinkings, we sort of have at least a pretense on the part of the editors at impartiality. I can't pretend to be impartial here. I'm grumpy and angry and depressed about social media generally. And that's partly because I'm a bit like Tom Hardy's dad. I don't understand enough about it. I don't use it much. I've often gone on Facebook and I'm completely baffled. I have no idea what it's for except getting in touch with exes, which is probably not a good idea. So there's that. But it's partly because I'm like Tom Hardy's dad. I'm a parent and I see social media acting as a time sponge. I see it reducing social interactions to 2 dimensions, not 3. And I see it operating as a purveyor of hate, making people at best unhappy and at worst much worse than that. And like many people, you know, I've seen The Social Network, and although Zuckerberg is played by an actor, it sort of resonates that this organization is set up and run by a manipulative moral vacuum. I see The Social Dilemma, that great documentary, and it's quite obvious that these algorithms are tuned to hook you and take as much of your time as possible. And I hear Gareth Southgate in his parental mode there. Is this such a good idea, he says. And to me, it's just a no-brainer. It's a really, really bad idea. So I decided that I ought to be upfront and say where I'm coming from on that. Much of the discussion about social media is predicated on the idea that we can't ditch it. We cannot uninvent it. And I accept that perhaps that the question at the top of this, can't we just ditch it and get along, is unrealistic. But I submit, Your Honour, you can't invent the wheel, but that doesn't mean you have to drive a car. And in fact, we've all decided that cars are an environmental disaster, and we are reinventing them. You can't uninvent the steak, the T-bone, the ribeye. It doesn't mean you have to eat them. And we've pretty much decided that they're a disaster as well, and a lot of people are giving up on steak. So if it's not okay to say to young people, why not ditch it, or at least for a time, I want to know why. And I do appreciate that that discussion can go down a difficult route, and it can look like victim blaming. I don't accept that, but we can go there if we want to today. Anyway, enough of my blather. But thank you very much for letting me get it off my chest. The point of a thinking, as many of you will know, is to hear from you. Please pitch in on the chat. Raise your electronic hand if you'd like to, and we will come to as many of you as possible in the time. Pitch in sooner rather than later, because what always happens is we run out of time towards the end. And we have a loosely enforced rule, which is no questions. That only means we want to hear what you think. You don't have to couch it as a question. Means we can hear from more people apart from anything else. Anyway, as I said, we've been joined by some really highly informed speakers today. They include Diane Banks, CEO of North Bank Talent, which represents talent in all media, but especially social media. Dr. Charlotte Pennington, lecturer in psychology at Aston University, who's co-authored a recent paper on different ways of consuming social media. And I confess, Charlotte, I've read the abstract, but I couldn't get through to the paper itself. So you'll have to tell us more about that. And Troy Townsend, who is head of player engagement at KickItOut, which is English football's equality and inclusion organization. And Troy, as I mentioned, I'd love to start with you, because this week, and in fact, for the past 5 weeks, it's been all about, you know, football's best role models and the abuse that they've had to endure, most but not all of it, on social media. Bearing in mind what I just quoted Southgate as saying, do you think that ditching social media is ever an option for these players, or is that just too simplistic?
Simple answer to that is it's too simplistic, but I want to take you back. You mentioned the last 5 weeks. I'm going to take you back to the period of time that I've worked for the organization KickItOut, which is 10 years in September. This has been part of our battle and challenge throughout that period of time. More prominently, obviously, in recent times, where people have become aware that the social media platforms promote and advocate the kind of, well, I'll tell you now, the most vile abuse that you could ever wish to imagine. But this is not a new challenge. This is not a new battle, particularly in a football environment. You know, it's a battle that predominantly Black players, but players across the board, to be honest, have to deal with the kind of hatred of others who believe that they've made a mistake, who believe that they've initiated the impact of their side not gaining 3 points. And obviously, last Sunday, the fact that England didn't win the Euros 2020 championships. Social media is an option. You can opt in, you can opt out, you can delete, you can decide not to comment. But ultimately, that does put the focus on the individual. My thing is all around, why are these platforms not fit for purpose for everyone to use? Why are players worried about the impact of their action on a football pitch, knowing that it's going to explode on social media, whether they're on there or not, by the way, whether they decide to comment or not, whether they decide to look at it or not, it will still be an explosion of comment, an explosion of plus and minuses, and something that, and I don't think we, when I say we collectively, I don't mean the people on this platform. I may not even mean the people that are listening today, but generally as society, I don't think we really appreciate and realize the impact that it has, not just on the individual, but also on their family members, on people that are close to him, on players that share the same changing room. It's a traumatic experience, an experience where you have to live over again. It's not a one-hit wonder experience either, you know. I take the words of Bukayo Saka on yesterday when he said, as he walked up to take the most important touch of a ball that he was going to take in his life as a 19-year-old up to this date, going through his mind was the miss meant that he was going to be a target for these abusers. And whether you're 19, whether you're my age, which I'm not going to reveal today, I don't think that should be part of anybody's psyche as they're playing sport, as they're living their life, as they go about their general business. But what I will say is there's a number of factors here, and I'm sorry if I'm taking a little bit longer than I should. Ahead. I like social media in my personal life. I like it. I have been abused on social media. I have to deal with players who have been abused on social media. But I tell you now, I wouldn't have as many connects, industry figures, people outside the game, people inside the game, people from across the world that know who I am, that understand my work, that also connect with me, if it wasn't for social media. So we are, in a sense, we are almost brainwashed that it is the best form of communication. But in being brainwashed, we also have to take the other bits that come with it as well. The multiple platforms that I share, Twitter is absolutely the most vile that there is, the most vile. But I will tell you now that on a business platform, LinkedIn, I was racially abused on that platform only last year. I was told that my opinion about my experiences around race and discrimination should not be aired in that environment. And then I was targeted in that environment, as I was last week on Monday, when I posted my opinion around the players and the abuse that they received playing for their national team. So that's just a little bit of an opener from me.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Troy. Can I just come back to you on one point? You used the word brainwashed in connection with how we view these platforms. Are we under a fundamental misapprehension because they're free and they're 24/7? We think of them as part of the public realm in a way, but we're walking into a realm created by a private company. And that documentary I mentioned, it makes the point that if it's free, then you're the product. So you're still part of a commercial undertaking in which you're being commoditized. I mean, so are users misunderstanding what they're a part of?
Yeah, I think so. In a sense, it's a really good point, because listen, many users will go on that platform, and it's not only a promotional tool for a business or a way of earning, a significant amount of money or putting out something that you're doing for charity. So there are the positives, there are the opportunities. It's the most instant and easily accessible way of putting out a message immediately. And in that sense, let's go back into the sporting environment. Players utilize it for those very means. They utilize it to connect closer with the decent fan base. If you think of a Marcus Rashford, we'll probably hear his name a lot today. He has utilized that platform in the most powerfulest of ways to connect so many different people that he would not be able to reach on just an ordinary level. So whilst there are massive negatives, we must have an understanding of the positives as well. It is a platform that you can drive information to. I don't listen to the news anymore because the news comes later than what it does on social media. And for me, I'm already informed by what happens on social media before I listen to maybe the 1 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news. I've already got the information. So the instant access is something that the general public absolutely want and thrive with. But the other side of it, obviously, is what I call the dark side of it, the side that many people have to face on a regular occurrence. Our sporting figures have to face, not just our footballers, but the LGBT community in regards to the hate that goes on in there. Women in regards to sexism. I've seen, again, so many vile and abhorrent comments on there that my thing is the platforms, is the ownership. Is who is dealing with them to tell them that they need to make their platform serve the whole public, not just part of the public as such. And obviously that's where a lot of my work has driven me in regards to holding those platforms to account.
Right, and I'd love to hear some more about that later. Of course, you make a great point about Rashford. He's used his platform brilliantly. Can I come now to Charlotte Pennington, because you've found sort of empirically that the way social media affects you depends to an extent on how you consume it. Can you tell us more about what you found?
Of course, thank you, Giles. What I'd like to say first off is that the psychological literature around the benefits and the negatives of social media use is extremely mixed. And the methodology underpinning it is quite weak as well. So typically we're using self-report scales to ask people, how long do you go on social media? How many hours a day do you use this? And people aren't very accurate at reporting that. So there is some research that suggests that social media can have a negative effect on fear of missing out, for example, or comparisons. And also with regards to Instagram and photo type platforms, body image and satisfaction in younger children. However, on the flip side of that coin, there's also a lot of information out there that suggests, as Troy was saying, it's good for social connectedness. It makes us potentially feel less lonely, because if you're like me, someone who lives away from my parents and my friends, I then have the opportunity to speak to them. But the problem overall is that when we talk about social media, and this relates to the Euros as well, we don't think about or discuss how people actually use it. So within our current research, what we did is we ditched the self-reports and we created a mock social media platform that looked like Instagram, and you could use it like Instagram. And what we found is that people's psychosocial outcomes, so these social factors related to social media use, differed based on how people actually use that platform. So for example, if you were more interactive, you were a person that sought out others, you would comment on their posts, you would share their photos, you would interact through verbal exchanges, we found that they reported having greater social connectedness and this bridging experience that Troy was talking about having more connections. However, when people were more reactive, they just liked, or passive, they just scrolled or passively consumed, that was related to less positive outcomes. And we kind of theorized from that if you are a passive consumer, you're not getting that social element from social media, you are just viewing it. And I think this comes back to what Troy was saying around the racial abuse with the Euros, which is an extreme negative, and we did not look at prejudice on social media here. I think the problem here is that those people with the racial biases that are voicing these, it's typically passive use. They are just commenting, they are viewing, they're sometimes private, so there's no accountability and there's no regulation currently of social media. And I think that that might be the basis of the problem. So actually thinking about how these people use it and then regulating those people so that they can't use it in that way, because they're sometimes anonymous, and that is the problem currently.
So just to be clear, your suggestion is, and we appreciate it's all too recent to have concrete research, is that most of the racist abuse is basically retweeted by passive users rather than an active racism. I mean, it's racist, but rather than original acts. Is that right?
So what I should say first is that we didn't look at this in our own research, but I think what Troy is saying is extremely pertinent and important to discuss. So it would be my opinion that it does not mean that they are racist. They are. Being a passive user does not make you a worse or better person. That's not about the use. But the problem here is around regulation and accountability. So someone might not necessarily go up to someone on the street and say or provide a racial prejudice towards them, but they feel like they can currently get away with that on social media because typically there have been no consequences, there are no regulations.
Right.
A lot of these people you see within the comments, they might not have a profile picture or they might be anonymized. And when the police try to intervene, that's very difficult because they sometimes can't even contact those people. So they're trying, but I think we've got to do something about regulation and accountability. Okay. I share the view as well that social media can be used positively and it can have many positive benefits, but that's when people are engaging in a positive social way. And what we're seeing here with the racism and the prejudice is a flip side to that. And that is something very negative that I do not claim to have researched yet, which of course has many different consequences and outcomes.
Well, thank you. Anonymity, clearly a huge issue. And you mentioned regulation, and Troy was talking about the need to work with these platforms. If if it's unrealistic to get people to ditch social media, then let's change the experience. This is, in a sense, a technical follow-up. Charlotte, have a go, and then I can see you nodding, Diane. Is there a sort of an equivalent of the blue tick on Twitter that it would be feasible for platforms to give people, to let them be active social media users, and might it be dependent on using your own name?
So I don't know too much about this at the moment, but I have seen on Twitter that people are getting verified to have a blue tick. I'm not sure how Twitter looks at this currently, but there are people now who are verified as real people technically, and you then get that blue tick next to your name. And I think this is potentially what we need. It's definitely doable. The problem historically that we've seen with social media is that it's not done. Anybody can create an account, anybody can have a fake name, fake personal details, and that is not checked by anybody. So it definitely can be done. The problem is it needs to be done.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Diane, as I mentioned, Diane Banks runs a talent agency that represents, among other people, influencers. I don't know, does that automatically include footballers?
Yeah, it could do. Yeah, we don't actually represent any footballers, but
Right.
but yeah, no, absolutely could do.
I just wanted to ask, since we've got to this point in the conversation about how do you regulate social media use so that it doesn't become a safe space for racists in effect. I mean, do you have thoughts on that? Because you clearly have you're an enthusiast and evangelist for the medium and an interest in it surviving and thriving. So what are your views on how it should be regulated?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it would be interesting to talk about some meta trends that we're seeing. I mean, as you say, we represent clients for it's largely brand work in the social space. We also do books, CV presenting, etc. And here are some relevant book projects that our clients have done recently. I'm quite interested in, really zooming right out and looking at how the space is evolving in a wider sense. I mean, some trends that we've seen recently, first of all, there's a big move towards authenticity, not more in the kind of brand space, I guess, not in the sort of random people abusing each other space, but in a kind of broader sense in social media, there's a trend towards authenticity and values, and that has not filtered through to Twitter yet. I'll say a bit more about why I think that is at the moment. But if you look at TikTok is a very, very different animal. I think, I mean, my thoughts on, I have a theory that Twitter and Facebook probably won't exist in 10 years' time, because I think they are very, very unnatural ways of communicating. I mean, you're allocated just a few written words and you sort of throw those words out there. As you said earlier, Giles, you said it was operating in 2 dimensions rather than 3 dimensions. And I think that is a huge part of it. Troy, you mentioned that you thought that Twitter was the absolutely most vile space. And I would completely agree with that, because I think it is the least natural way of communicating, because you're literally just chucking out a few words. You're not taking time you're not crafting an image, you're certainly not making a video, you're not using the full range of human expression, which isn't just a few words. It's communicating via facial expressions, via your tone of voice, your hand gestures, whatever, eye contact, whatever it might be. So it is an incredibly unnatural way of communicating. And I think, Charlotte, what you were saying about passive use, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And I guess that kind of ties into what I'm saying, is that, Twitter, it just doesn't feel natural. So, I mean, if you look at, we're finding certainly, and I might venture to argue that this is a market correction starting to happen. Advertising money, because as we were saying before, I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about the business model here is advertising. It's advertisers paying to brand brands paying, etc. We're seeing that advertising money is moving away from Twitter towards TikTok, well, Instagram and TikTok.
And is it your basic argument that that's because there's more authenticity to be found there?
It's just TikTok it offers the full range of human ways of connecting. So, when you make a video of yourself, you can show you can smile, you can look at the camera, you can connect in a much more human way than if you're just writing a few words down on a tweet and just firing them out there. And I think that a lot of the problem is that Twitter is just not a natural way of communicating. And I'm wondering if the market is kind of starting to correct itself in that way.
That's really interesting. I wonder if we can come to Anushka Sharma, because you've just said in the chat, Anushka, I feel like Insta just wants to sell me stuff. And I confess I'm not a user, but any authenticity is presumably curated authenticity at best. And as you're suggesting, Anushka, it may just be influence trying to sell you stuff. Say more about your experience there.
Yeah, I just find that Instagram has become like a selling tool, and every third post I think now is something that's presenting a potential product to me. And often it's a fast moving consumable good, it's fashion, and actually also in Instagram stories where you sort of swipe through what people have uploaded. Yesterday I was presented with an offensive robe with Ganesha on the back. I'm a practicing Hindu, and that appropriates Hinduism as far as I'm concerned. It's not appropriate. And I really wrestle with my conscience about reporting that as something that's inappropriate. And I didn't in that scenario. Number one, because that's someone's livelihood and the work that they're doing, it impacts on them. Number two, I don't know whether they've self-identified me because I'm brown and of Asian origin. I might not be Indian, I might be Pakistani, I might have another faith. I don't know how they've identified me and targeted me. So I feel like that's a little bit unfair. And I'm often shown content from all around the world that is anything but pop culture in the UK. And I'm born and raised in London. And I literally verbatim can sit side to side next to a friend of me in a park, and we can scroll through our Instagram screens. They can be a totally different race to me. And what they're presented with as a fellow born and raised Londoner is completely different. And so there's no transparency in the algorithm in what we're shown. And we're sort of like giving away data by what we're searching for and all of those things. And that's supposed to, make things like more appropriate and tuned to us. But actually what it does is turn me off it even more as a service. And I think Imogen was also mentioning earlier on that she's kind of fed up with like the selling side of Instagram, not to put words in her mouth, but it is just something that I'm really conscious of. I remember like at the beginning of lockdown, I randomly bought this stupid Perspex visor for no reason other than I thought it was going to be something valuable in this ongoing pandemic. I keep it as a relic to remind myself that Instagram targeting me to sell me crap, sorry to swear, is exactly that. So I'm very conscious now, but I worry about more impressionable younger people that have access to a credit card or finances online where they're potentially buying something and not understanding why. So I think it's a really big conversation, and that's just Instagram.
Well, thank you, Anushka, and I salute your tolerance in not reporting that, and sort of an awareness that there's presumably a person as well as a livelihood as well as an algorithm behind it. Can I just briefly ask you the question that we asked at the top of the session? Do you ever consider ditching or detoxing from social media as a solution to this, or is it too important to you for other reasons? And I have a follow-up.
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, I took Facebook off my phone. I've deactivated my account, but I haven't deleted it. I did that because I didn't want Facebook to know what I was searching for in my browser. Unfortunately, if you deactivate your Facebook account, it doesn't stop Facebook collecting those cookies. And it's a big way that I connect and I'm in contact with my family, and also as a minority solopreneur in technology and the space field, it's an invaluable tool for me to use to present my work and the opportunities that I'm trying to build for my work and my business. Instagram is private, and my Twitter is the only public now forum apart from blog posts that I choose to share across LinkedIn and on my Medium blog post. I do have reservations about it, but I think it's a wider conversation about understanding why and how algorithms are presenting me to the world and how the platforms are presenting content and views back to me. And it's a really hard, muddy, fuzzy grey space that we sit in, particularly when current events around being a person of colour. There is a whole Indian Twitter, there's a whole Black Twitter movement, but that serves as like a subculture in the mainstream, in parallel with the mainstream. So it really is an uncomfortable place to be, where I just don't know where I sit or fit. That's as honest as I can be about it, Giles.
It's very honest. Do you feel that you could not be doing the business that you're doing without the social media platforms that you use?
So my objective with social media a couple of years ago, when I moved from politics, worked on the Olympics, and now work in technology, which is what I did 20 years ago when I graduated. Social media became the way that I could build relationships with some of the key players in technology outside of the UK because they weren't presented to me in the ecosystem here. And that provided me invaluable ways to grow my social media presence as well as working in social media. So I was able to connect with people that I would otherwise have no access to. And there are no boundaries when it comes to jurisdictions or like global, boundaries when you're connecting with someone, and it moves from, say, someone following you back on Twitter to connecting with you on LinkedIn and actually engaging with the work that you're doing. And a lot of that really helped me, but I feel in the last couple of years, it's stagnated. And I think this is where I feel a bit uncomfortable with like influencers sometimes, because they step into places to take the place of experts, and the experts that we all know and respect for the years of work that they've built are now not being listened to or being presented to us. So I often have to scratch the surface with an influencer to understand, if they're talking to me about a skincare product, what is their expertise other than the fact that I know that they're going to have a discount code and maybe end up with some money as an affiliate for selling me and presenting me a product. I'd rather go to an expert. And so influencers sometimes muddy the space of expertise. And that's I think, again, another challenge.
Thank you. I see you've raised your physical hand, Dan, and I will come back to you because you deserved a chance to come back on that. But first, if possible, I want to come to Sebastian Jones. I can see you on my screen as well as in the chat, making a point about where you think young people's opinions are going to go. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, I was just talking about social media use in younger people, especially on TikTok. I mean, like, and I was also making a point that, like, despite knowing how destructive it is, like, I know for a fact that, like, the more time I spend on social media, like, just like the more depressed I feel. Like, it's like a very direct link of, like, I wake up in the morning and, like, the first thing I do is, like, look on my phone and, like, scroll for, like, what feels like 5 minutes and can often be like an hour. And then you just feel, like, heavy for the whole day. You just feel like your eyelids are, like, weighing on you, and you just feel like, I don't know, that maybe that's kind of depressed or something. But then especially in younger kids, like, my little cousin has pretty normal social media habits, I think, for people in his circles, and he spends easily 25 hours a week on TikTok. And yeah, I don't know where to go from that, but yeah.
Well, let me ask you, where do you classify yourself in Charlotte's classification? Active, passive, or active? What is it? Excuse me. It is interactive, reactive, or passive. I mean, it sounds to me as if you might be one of the passive users who gets very little out of it as a result.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, I'd probably tell someone that, but I think that's, if you'd always underplay the amount you use social media, because it feels like an addiction of some kind that you want to, like, keep quiet. Like, it's embarrassing to admit how much time you spend on social media, because, like, I don't know, I think people my age as well, like, you link heavy social media usage to, like, insecurity. Like, you can say that, like, if someone's, like, constantly scrolling and see where they stand, on all these social media sites, like they're like nervous about who, you know, they're trying to like, you know, network in a way. Yeah, and I think therefore I'd kind of underplay it. Probably in the same way someone who was addicted to alcohol or addicted to drugs would never like admit how much they used them. Because yeah, and that kind of makes me think, and I've spoken to friends about this in the past, like whether we could treat heavy social media use and addiction as like a form of addiction similar to alcohol addiction or drug addiction. Like if I tell my friends, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm addicted to my phone, they're like, just like stop using it, you know, just get off your phone. Whereas like, I feel like if you told your friend or a family, like I'm addicted to alcohol, like they would be like, okay, like how can I help? You know, like what can I do? Like, I wonder how that would change like the framework and the way people interact.
So wait, are you saying that your friends do say, get off your phone?
Yeah, they just treat it very informally. It's very casual. Like, you know, if I was like, yeah, like I think I'm addicted to my phone, I'm spending so much time on it, and I know it's destructive, and I still spend all my time on my phone. They, you know, no one takes it seriously. They're like, you know, just stop using your phone. But what if we treated it like some sort of more serious addiction, and, you know, said like, you know, if your friend said I'm on my phone 5+ hours a day on social media, like what if we were like, look, how can I help you? Like, what can I do? Like, maybe I'll take your phone from you for these hours of the day. Like, yeah, I don't know, maybe treating it as a more serious form of addiction could be interesting.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte, I see you've raised your hand, and I don't want to come back to both of you and indeed to Troy, because I don't want to run out of time before we've heard more about the actual work that you're able to do with the platforms. But first, I'm hoping briefly to come to my colleague, James Wilson, because you've done a bit of app deletion, haven't you, James? And I wanted to know how that's working out for you. Are you there, James? I'm outing you. Never mind.
Sorry, Giles. No, I'm here.
Oh, great.
You just caught me as I was in the middle of some work, but I should have been listening more attentively. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from social media. And so I deleted Twitter and Instagram off my phone. And it is actually it's done the world of good. So I remember it was around Christmas time, and I was looking at, I was following a thread on Twitter of a couple of journalists I follow who were arguing. And it just made me feel really kind of like, I don't know if down is the right word, but I was following that thread for like 5-10 minutes and it kind of contributed nothing to my day. It made me feel a bit sad. So I just decided to delete the app and kind of just look at my laptop occasionally. Excuse me. And it's kind of made me feel so much happier on a day-to-day basis, really. I'd recommend it.
So do you ration, or did you go cold turkey?
I went cold turkey initially for about 3 weeks.
And how often do you use those apps now?
Probably once or twice a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you go on for half an hour, how does it work? I
re-download it, which in itself is inconvenient. Mm-hmm. So it kind of puts me off doing that.
Right.
And then, and then I have a scroll through, occasionally post something, but it's not really a big part of my life anymore. Whereas before, like Sebastian was saying, it kind of takes up what feels like 5 minutes, but could actually be half an hour at a time.
Right.
And,
okay. Well, that's really interesting. Let's hear from Charlotte, and Diane, I promise we'll come to you. But I think you've done work on other forms of addiction, haven't you? Are they comparable?
So I must admit, my expertise is in alcohol research, and we know a lot more about alcohol addiction because it's been around longer. There's a lot more research into this, and social media is kind of like my side project at the moment. And that might be because of personal use as well and wanting to understand. But what I wanted to come back is to the term addiction and how we use this when we think about social media and the research that underpins this. I think, Sebastian, first of all, what you were saying about how you might feel embarrassed accurately reporting how long you'd been on social media, I think that's fascinating. And that tells me as a researcher that questionnaires are not a good way of measuring this because people won't tell you honestly or accurately how they're using it. But I'm more interested as well about what the panel think about social media addiction. So from a research point of view, currently addiction of social media is not a medically recognised disorder. It's not within the DSM, for example, whereas substance use of alcohol and smoking, as examples, are. And I think it's important to think about the way that we use the term addiction and then to look at the research around this. So we might say, for example, through passing, oh, I feel like I'm addicted to social media, or, oh, I'm addicted to chocolate. And this might denote that we like it, that we consume it, and that we feel that we might want it in our lives or find it hard to not have it in our lives. But this differs, I think, compared to addiction to substances, based on the fact that they are about a compulsive engagement with a rewarding stimuli that has adverse health consequences. And when you look at this in parallel with the research, there's research by Amy Orban, which is a beautiful study, tens of thousands of participants, and they looked at the relationship between social media use and psychological well-being. And they found that it only predicted under 1% of psychological well-being. And in a satirical way, of course.
It only predicted under 1% of psychological well-being problems.
In general, how we feel.
There's a very weak correlation. No correlation.
Yeah, so it's nearly a negligible correlation, or it would be a negligible correlation. And it was a little bit satirical, and it related this to other things such as wearing glasses or eating vegetables. And it found that things that we thought would not be related to social media actually have a greater, sorry, I said that wrong, sorry. Things that would not be related to well-being, we might not think of, had a greater predictive element to our well-being. So that makes me wonder and question the term addiction and scientifically whether we're really at that stage to be using that term.
All right, that's a good cautionary note. If there's any possibility of you putting a link to that study in the chat, it would be great.
Of course, I will do.
Now, Diane, let's just come back to you, because Anushka was talking about authenticity and Instagram. What did you want to say about that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to pick up on Anushka's point about influencers versus experts, and hopefully offer a bit of hope there, because a broader trend that we're seeing, in fact, we're launching our new website at the moment, be North Bank Creators, and we specifically, our premise is that we only represent experts, we don't represent, in inverted commas, influencers, and that is largely where the market is going. I mean, we're finding more and more that brands are wanting to know when they hire a so-called influencer, although now the term is creators, because it's considered to be a little bit less sort of less flashy and celebby, I suppose, as it were. But the brands that we're working with are very, very keen to know what those clients' expertise are in the area and why they're qualified to talk about their product. And we have quite long conversations now with brands about that. So I think that is a trend that it's not probably manifest, obviously, at the moment, but it's a trend that's coming down the line.
Thank you very much. I can see in the chat people are being quite blunt in their response to the term influencer. Andrew, noted. Troy, I know that you have to go promptly at 2, if not a couple of minutes before, so I want to do a bit of a handbrake turn and come back to where we started, because you said most of the work that you've been doing with KickItOut is with the platforms to try to get them to help. So my question is, how's that going? Are you getting anywhere?
Not sure we've got long enough for my response, Giles, to be totally honest. We're talking to them. We continue to talk to them. We have been talking to them for quite a long time. There's now, obviously, I think football has been more empowered now. And I don't want to get into the controversy of how football deals with discrimination in its own house. But at the moment, it's having its collective voice outwardly that is challenging the social media platforms. We've broken a cycle because we've been dealing with Twitter UK, and we realize now that the whole power lands with Twitter US. So forget Twitter Europe, forget Twitter UK, it's Twitter US. We are in conversations now with many other sports stars from other sports. Football has a unique power in this country, but on a global scale, football is only a small proportion of the kind of dynamics of these social media platforms. So we're talking to sports stars in the US. I'm going to say this just out openly, and it's Twitter that we're dealing with at the moment. We have dealt with Facebook, and we have dealt with, you know, other companies around, so that they are dragging their heels in this conversation. I think they feel
even in the States, when you're dealing with
even with the States, they are dragging their heels. They don't really hear what we have to say, the pain in our voices. We've had some very powerful people, you know, have to talk about the stress that this platform is causing them because of the messages they receive, the direct messages, whether they be through emojis, whether they be through actual language, whether they be through any other means that you can. And they're dragging their heels. You know, let me give you this example, two examples. Any football fan here will remember that Manchester United were in the Europa League final only 6 weeks ago. They lost that final. Twitter had promised us that this machine that they were working on that would eliminate the vile hatred that platform was almost ready for if Man United lost. That night, Marcus Rashford and a couple of his teammates again were subjected to the most vile abuse. I heard someone earlier say, you know, are you witnessing the abuse, or is it just coming up on your feed? You know, these people are atting Marcus Rashford. They are atting him. They want him to see it. They want him to know what they feel of him. And all of a sudden at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm looking at this raft of abuse that Marcus is receiving. When we contact Twitter the following morning and said, how comes all this has been directed to Marcus? Their response, and I'm going to be totally honest with the response here, was that they failed to switch the machine on that night that was due to protect Marcus from that abuse. So all of a sudden now, on the biggest night of the season, at that period of time, Marcus is receiving all this abuse because of a failure on the social media platforms account. Same thing happened for the Euro final, where I think now Facebook, Instagram have now come out and almost said the same thing, that the kind of work that they were working on in this area, they'd forgotten to switch it on. Now, during the course of this week, whilst I've focused on Twitter, whilst I've focused on Instagram, I've got to look at football as well, because you may have heard a story on Wednesday that was breaking, that a group of young players from, I'll say it because it's out there, Portsmouth Football Club, have got a private TikTok group. So it's good that TikTok has been mentioned, and decided to use that group to racially target every single player that missed a penalty for England, with use of the N-word, with use of lynching, with use of bombing their house, with use of
emojis. I don't know what that means, bombing their house.
Well, that's what they said. So as far as I'm concerned,
they're threatening real world.
Threatening real world, yeah.
Okay.
And then with emojis as well. Emojis, one of the emojis depicting slavery, and monkey emojis. Now, these people actively are in football. They're youngsters, they're in football. This is the example that is being set now, that they connect themselves so much to society, because that's society's kind of opinion, fan base opinion, if you want for a better term. But then also they're part of the problem as well. And what it does, it almost says that internally football has a massive issue, sport has a massive issue. I've seen that, you know, some of the people that have been found to have posted a lot of these comments are now, you know, having to deal with the action, the consequences of the language as well. But there's certain data going around at the moment, and I'm not really a data freak, so excuse me here a minute, but data saying that, you know, out of 100% of the foul language that came towards the players last Sunday, 80% of it is from abroad. So what does that say? That are we alleviating the 20% in this country that do target the players in that matter, because the bigger mass, you know, sit in a country that we're not prepared to track, or sit in countries that we're not prepared to track? And I just want to end this by saying one of the this did come up on my feed, but one of the images that came up on my feed that had racial language in it as well was Bukayo Saka superimposed, his face superimposed on George Floyd's body as he was being knelt on by that police officer, and had Chiellini, who is the Italian captain, for anyone that doesn't know, had his face superimposed as the policeman, with just the N-word on it. You know, what I'm saying is, somewhere along the line, I think the young man is going to see that, because of the amount of that it's on all over social media platforms. The impact towards an individual or group of people's mental well-being has never really been spoken enough in this space. Has never in football. Sorry, I addressed that. In football, has never really been spoken enough. Has never really been addressed. You know, in terms of many people that will see that, witness it, follow it. And I just want to end by saying, in a European Super Cup tie where Liverpool played Chelsea 2.5 seasons ago, Tammy Abraham missed a penalty. So this is why none of this is news for us, and received again the same vile abuse. Tammy didn't see it, so Tammy hadn't witnessed it. So in a sense, Tammy was just dealing with the impact of missing that penalty, which meant that his club didn't win a European trophy. He was away for a while, got home, so went to see his mother, and his mother said to him, "Why are people talking about you in that tone and in that language and in that way?" So as much as what you try and protect the player, there's a whole group of family members and people around that player that somehow would know what's going on anyway. So the last thing is with those social media platforms, I don't think they care about that impact. Now, obviously, the government is talking about this online harms bill that will hopefully create the change that we all want to see. I tell you now, they've been talking about that for the last 3 years. It takes a serious amount of time to get into actual legislation. Twitter told me the other day, we're still 8 months away from that. But yet, anyone that understands, sorry to keep drumming on in my field, the football field, anyone that was heard all and witnessed all the fury, the outrage around the European Super League, will understand that our Prime Minister stamped his feet and slammed his fist and said that he'll create legislation immediately to make sure that those 6 clubs do not benefit from joining, the elite of a European football. Football slammed its fist again and said, no way will this happen to devalue the rest of our game. So if they're prepared to do it when it impacts on their finances, when it impacts on the structure within this game, we know that they can influence in this space. So I'm almost saying, are you choosing not to because it's not a priority on your kind of Richter scale of priorities, which is kind of the message that's being sent to so many people in our sport, unfortunately.
So there's that question about politicians, but you also raise a very important one about the platforms themselves. When you just mentioned that Twitter, you have personal interactions with Twitter in which they say, oh, legislation's 8 months off, which begs the question, are they willing to lead or not?
No, it's a simple answer to that, Giles. Sorry to cut across you. There's a simple answer to that. They don't want to lead. We're pressuring them to lead. We're pressuring them to take ownership. And just think of what I'm saying here. We're having to pressure them to do that. We're having to pressure them to say, you can be the leaders here out of all the social media platforms to put so much in place to eliminate the hate and discrimination in your environment. But we're having to pressure them to do that. And now we're waiting for this meeting. Sorry?
How do they explain that position?
They revert back to type. They revert back to, these things take time. They revert back to, yes, we're working towards. But I've been hearing that language for the past 8 years, like I said to you, Giles. So whilst there are a lot of new people are now in this conversation and they're thinking, all right, well, at least they said they're working towards. I can tell you now that 8 years ago was the same conversation. I can tell you now that 5 years ago was the same conversation. So I'm not fazed by that. I'm actually saying, well, I've heard it all before. Can we put some timelines? And we are working on some communication where we do hold them to account with timelines. But I tell you now, we've been working on that for the past 6 weeks. And every time we go back and say, have they been finalized? There's another story and there's another story. you can probably hear my frustration at the moment, and my frustration is around our sport and many sporting stars. But I will take it on the basis of everybody that, you know, has a fear about using the platform whilst wanting to use it because there is a certain amount of good in there. It is that I can see us no closer, no clearer to having the kind of protection that should just happen if you were potentially walking out, you know, doing your everyday life on the street.
Very quickly, because this is fascinating, are there specific instances in which you have asked for particular abusers to be taken down, to be removed from a platform, and they've refused to do so?
Let's get this, Joel. They don't actually refuse, but the timeline around dealing with those incidents has to be better. I know for a fact that the police have been knocking on Twitter's door for a couple of incidents, and it's been 6 months down the line before Twitter has given them the information they need. In one of the cases, Twitter can only hold that information for a certain amount of time. The time elapsed. So although the police knew who it was that was abusing an individual, they couldn't act because Twitter was withholding the information. Now, they don't like those stories to get out into the public domain because it looks really bad on them. And it's almost like the police are struggling, even with their powers, to hold the social media platforms to account. Mm-hmm. There was a young lad last June, 12 years of age, on Instagram. You're not allowed to be on Instagram unless you are 13, which I think is the wrong age anyway. 12 years of age, who targeted 3 Crystal Palace players before they played Aston Villa last June. And the main one was Wilfried Zaha, and he had he mocked up a cornflakes box and put a black face on it, like the black and white minstrels. Anyone who's old enough to remember that, unfortunately I am, the black and white minstrels. And then he also got an image of the Ku Klux Klan and posted that. 12 years of age. Where's he getting his knowledge from to understand about the Ku Klux Klan? Where's he get his knowledge from to understand blacked out faces? And by the way, he shouldn't be on the platform anyway. But this young man had 3 accounts, one that he used to abuse, one that he used to support his football club, and one that he used just in case the abusive one was shut down. So if you're not going to hold these people to account, I don't care what age they are, all they're going to do is laugh in our faces and say, they've shut that one down, so I'll revert back to my one that I use, my burner account, I call them. And despite everything, all the information we give to these social media accounts, they're not proactive. So they will pat themselves on the back for shutting down 10, 12, 15 accounts on the back of all the abuse on Sunday. And what we're saying is, but are you holding these people accountable? Are you asking these, you know, are you knocking on these people's door and saying to them, you know, we have evidence that. So it's easy to shut down accounts, and these accounts will come back up and they'll have an egg as their profile picture, and they'll have multiple numbers in there, but they're active. And so actually they are failing the public. They are failing everybody in this social media world because they're not prepared to act in the manner and way that they should.
Troy, thank you. And I'm failing you by keeping you on beyond 2 o'clock. But thank you very much. I think it's really important that we all hear some of these practical obstacles to progress. Nico, I see that you've got your hand up. Can you compress into just a line or two what it is you want to say? Because I feel I owe it to Charlotte and Diane to come back to them as well before we close.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Giles. I was noting in the chat that I was collecting for an anti-racist campaign outside Wembley in the 90s, and we raised hundreds of pounds, including from players. So there's been progress in football for a long time. But I'm just picking up on what Luke's saying. I think we're in danger of not looking at the social phenomena behind this and giving too much agency to technology. And I think we really need to ask about the political makeup of society, where I think a lot of people, and I'm not justifying anything they say, I've been an anti-racist all my life, find that they are excluded from politics, told they don't really have a role, told they're low information, and told what to think by people. And I think we're not arguing with people about why fighting racism is important to them. And I wonder if what we're seeing is in any way an expression of that alienation from politics while not defending it at all. Okay,
great point. Thank you, Nico. Let's come first to Diane. Just by way of wrapping up, if cold turkey is sort of going off social media altogether is not really an option. What's the single most important thing that you hope will happen in the next 5 years to make the medium that you work in a pleasanter place?
Yeah, I think it's market correction. And I mean, as I said, at the sort of front end of it, we're seeing that starting to happen. It isn't manifesting itself at the moment. I mean, I was quite shocked by what Troy was just saying. And I know that Twitter are renowned for not engaging, but the extent of it is, I mean, that's just absolutely horrendous. But I mean, I can't help thinking that ultimately that is very short-sighted of Twitter as a business. And I don't think, you know, if they're going to take that attitude, well, other platforms are going to realize that they're going to have to take a much better attitude, and they're going to become obsolete at some point. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in the next 2 years. But as I said, I just think in 10 years' time, I don't think Twitter will exist in 10 years' time, because I think advertisers will put their money where their mouth is, and they won't want to be, brands won't want to be associated with them. And the fact is, like any marketplace, any player in a marketplace has got to adapt to what people want and what, you know, brands want, what the customer base wants. So I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a sewer at the moment, but I think it's quite a new marketplace, and it's an evolving marketplace. So I think in the long term, we might, you know, even 5 years time, I think it might look very different in terms of the landscape.
Thank you. And finally, Charlotte, as a psychologist, do we as humans have it in us to prevail over the ability of these platforms to bring out the worst in us?
I think it's extremely interesting. I could talk about this for hours, but you typically find that kind of this communication or information transfer. Historically, we used to have newspapers. That's where we'd get our information from. That's now changed to social media. But what I want to end on is that social media can be used for bad and good. And to take something positive from this, the racism we've seen on Twitter is absolutely horrendous. But what we also saw as a potential silver lining from that was public outrage. Yeah. For example, Marcus Rashford, the image of him that was graffitied has now been covered up by people's love and support. I think the problem is it's the people potentially and not the platforms themselves, and it's how people are using them. So we need to get the people who have these explicit racial biases off those platforms, but we can also use social media for good. And so I just wanted to end on that balanced perspective, that it could be a two-sided coin.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Look, I've run over too far, but it's been really interesting, and I'm so glad, Troy, that we were able to hear some of the details of what you've been doing. I'd love to know more about the specific machine, as you described it, that Twitter undertook to use and didn't. I will get back in touch with you if I can to ask more about that. I thought it was really useful to hear from Charlotte about the 3 different ways of consuming and how passive use might correlate with negative use. There's clearly a separate, or at least a whole another part of the discussion about authenticity versus inauthenticity on Instagram and TikTok, and the muddy area that exists there. And thank you in my capacity as granddad for correcting me. Of course, Marcus Rashford has used social media in a tremendously positive way, and a lot of people do. Thank you all very much for joining me. I won't start using social media, but I do understand how a lot of people need to, and how it can be a force for good as well as ill. But we will continue to report on some of those issues that Troy was talking about. Thank you so much, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.